My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold the tissue-wrapped box as I stood in my parents' kitchen that Saturday morning. The December air in Bend was that peculiar kind of cold, not sharp and biting but suffocating, as if the sky itself were pressing down on my shoulders. I could smell my mother's cinnamon rolls cooling on the counter, that warm, safe aroma that had always meant home. But home doesn't always feel like home when you're the mistake in your family's genetic lineage. It was my little cousin Emma's 8th birthday. 8 years old, and already the golden child of the Brooks medical dynasty. Her mother is a cardiologist. Her father is an anesthesiologist. Her godparents are a neurologist and a surgical oncologist. And me? I'm the 25-year-old disappointment studying physical education at Bend State University, a field that, according to my family, was what you did when you couldn't get into real medicine. I remember standing in that kitchen, my gift in my hands, feeling the weight of it as if it were made of lead instead of all that beautiful training equipment I had carefully selected. A professional foam roller, resistance bands, a personalized jump rope, things that mattered in my world, in the field I had chosen despite their collective size and eye-rolling. Things that showed I believed in what I was doing. My mother walked past me, and I watched her pause. She was wearing her white coat over her silk blouse. She had come straight from the clinic. Everything about her screamed precision, control, accomplishment. She glanced at my wrapped gift, and I saw that microsecond of calculation cross her face. The one I had learned to recognize over years of family dinners and holiday gatherings. "Isabella," she said, her voice lowering to that particular tone reserved for delicate matters, "that's nice. But perhaps you should reconsider whether this gift is appropriate for the occasion." I felt something crack inside my chest. "What do you mean?" "It's perfect for Emma. She's been talking about wanting to get stronger, and..." "It might embarrass the family," my father interjected from the living room, not even looking up from his tablet where he was reading medical journals. Just like that. Not cruel, just factual. The way you would describe an inconvenient weather forecast. Embarrass the family. 3 words. That's what they reduced my thoughtfulness to. Not that I had spent hours researching what would genuinely help my cousin's athletic interests. Not that I had wrapped it beautifully with gold paper and a ribbon. Not that I had written a card with a handwritten note encouraging her to believe in her body and her strength. No, it would embarrass them. And this is where the story takes a turn that still makes my blood boil. They said my gift would embarrass the family. They said it wouldn't fit the tone of the afternoon. They suggested I get something different, something more tasteful. Perhaps a book from a bestseller list, or a gift card to a store my cousins preferred, something generic, safe, and invisible. Yet when Emma opened her presents that afternoon, surrounded by 12 family members in my parents' spotless living room with its cream-colored furniture and framed medical diplomas lining the walls like trophies of superiority, my gift was there. Opened. Examined. My mother had unwrapped it herself while I was in the bathroom, and she placed it in the pile with that polite smile of someone handling a small inconvenience. Emma's eyes lit up. She's 8, and she's already internalized the hierarchy of this family. The understanding that some gifts matter more than others, that some career choices are valid and others are, well, embarrassing. But she was honest in a way only children can be. She held up that jump rope, and she said the most devastating thing I've heard in a long time. "This is so cool, Aunt Isabella. Why did Grandma say it was embarrassing?" The silence that followed was the kind of silence that echoes. I watched my mother's face carefully arrange itself into that expression of maternal patience, the one that says we'll discuss this later, you understand it wasn't appropriate. My father cleared his throat. My uncle, the orthopedic surgeon, made a comment about Emma's attention span and smoothly redirected the conversation forward, the way surgeons are trained to redirect and control. But it was there, in that moment, that I felt the full weight of what it meant to be underestimated, dismissed, and yet never quite invisible enough to escape judgment. They wanted me quiet. They wanted me small. But they couldn't look away from the problem I represented, the proof that not everyone in this family needed their approval to matter. Here's what I want to know from you right now. Have you ever felt like the wrong choice in your family? Like your path was somehow a disappointment to people who claimed to love you? Comment below and tell me, because I know I'm not alone in this. That day, I made a silent decision. I didn't know exactly what form it would take, but I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep showing up in spaces where my existence was treated as a courtesy, where my achievements were met with polite indifference, where the work I was doing, work I believed in deeply, was positioned as second-rate simply because it wasn't medicine. The cold Bend air followed me as I left that party early. I sat in my 2015 Honda Civic, paid for myself with money from my summer jobs and internships, and I made a decision. That family had taught me something valuable that day. They had shown me exactly how far they would go to protect their image, how willing they were to undermine someone they were supposed to support, how little they actually saw me. But I was about to show them that I saw them. All of them. Every carefully constructed lie, every manipulative comment disguised as concern, every way they had systematically devalued my choices to make room for their superiority. The real story, the one that matters, wasn't that my gift would embarrass them. The real story is what happened next, and trust me, it's going to change everything. Subscribe if you want to hear how I uncovered something my family had been hiding for years, something that would finally make them understand that you can't keep someone's truth buried forever. 3 weeks had passed since Emma's birthday. 3 weeks of ignored messages, of calls that my mother answered and quickly found an excuse to end. 3 weeks that were the worst of my life, because I was beginning to understand something that hurts more than any rejection. My family didn't just disrespect me, they feared me. The spark came from an unexpected place. It was a Tuesday night, rain battering against the windows of my apartment in Bend with that rhythmic hypnotic sound that only Oregon rain can make. I was doing what any hurt and angry person would do, stalking my mother's professional LinkedIn profile, searching for anything that would justify why she had time to humiliate me at family gatherings but not time to talk to me during video calls. And that's when I saw it. A shared document in her activity history. A PDF. A title that froze my blood, Brooks Family Financial Trust, 2019 update. My heart began beating strangely. My breathing became rapid, shallow. That kind of breathing that happens when you're about to discover something you won't be able to ignore. My hands trembled as I clicked, as the document opened in my browser. And there it was. Everything. The truth that had been guarded like a secret so precious it rivaled the framed medical diplomas hanging on our walls. My father had received a substantial inheritance from my grandmother when she passed away 5 years ago. Not a small amount. We're talking about figures that began with $1 million. $1 million that my grandmother had left specifically to promote the success of my great-grandchildren in healthcare professions. And my father had established a trust that distributed part of that money annually to my cousin the doctor, my cousin the dentist, my aunt the dermatologist, all those who had chosen appropriate professions for the family. Everyone except me. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. Literally, I had to sit down on my kitchen floor because my knees could no longer support me. The kind of discovery that makes you question every conversation you've had with your parents in the last 5 years. Every "we don't have money to help with that," every "you need to learn to manage on your own," every suggestion that I should reconsider my career because clearly it wasn't as lucrative as medicine. Meanwhile, my cousins were using money that technically came from our grandmother to pay for graduate school, to put down payments on apartments, to finance educational trips to international medical conferences. And me? I was paying for my own university with summer jobs. I worked as a personal trainer at neighborhood gyms, taught physical education at public schools during the day, all while attending classes at night. My father told me that this built character. My mother whispered concerns about my stress, and suggested that perhaps I should consider a less demanding field. The rain continued battering against the window. The sound had changed. Now it seemed aggressive, as if the sky itself were tapping out in anger. But here's the part that really opened my eyes to who my family truly was. I started searching. I started digging. I discovered that this family fund had a founding document that I managed to access through a second cousin who still talked to us. And in that document, in tiny letters, was the clause that my father had unilaterally added in 2019, the year I had decided to study physical education. Eligible beneficiaries shall be restricted to family members who pursue approved careers in the healthcare sector, including medicine, surgery, dentistry, physical therapy, nursing, and pharmacy. Physical education, personal training, and similar professions do not qualify as healthcare careers for purposes of fund distribution. Do not qualify. As if my work that involves helping people regain mobility, build strength, transform their bodies and lives, wasn't health enough. As if I wasn't literally working in the healthcare field because I didn't have doctor in front of my name. I spent that entire night reading, researching, documenting. I found bank statements. I found emails between my father and my uncle discussing strategies for tax-efficient distribution of the money in a way that avoided questions. I found text messages that my mother had exchanged with my aunt where she literally said, "Isabella doesn't understand that medicine is a real career. If we stop having expectations of her, maybe she'll apply herself more." Stop having expectations. As if lowering your hopes were a motivation strategy. As if treating me like a lost cause were a form of love. As the early morning hours approached, it was nearly 4 a.m. when I finally stopped. I had changed. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something colder. Something more focused. It was clarity. My family had made a very, very clear choice. They had chosen money over honesty. They had chosen maintaining their narrative of superiority over genuinely supporting a family member who was working harder than all of them combined. They had chosen to lie to me for years, while secretly financing the success of my cousins. And more than that, they had documented everything. They had left trails of papers, of emails, of records that proved this had been deliberate, calculated, systematic. In that moment, in my small rented apartment in Bend, surrounded by the evidence of their betrayal, I knew exactly what I needed to do. But before that, I need to ask you something that's important to me, something that's as personal as this story. Where are you listening to this story from right now? Are you at home? At work? In traffic? Comment below and tell me, because when you share your location with me, when you tell me where you are, I feel like I'm not alone telling this. I feel like I'm sharing with friends, not just with viewers. Do you know that feeling when you discover you've been deceived, not by one person, but by an entire system of people you trusted? When you realize there were patterns you simply hadn't seen because you were too busy working, too busy trying to prove your worth. I spent the following weeks acting normally, going to classes, working my shifts, responding to my mother with cordial messages when she finally called me with that tone of "I'm sorry, let's move past this." And the whole time, I was organizing, planning, documenting every lie. Because I understood something in that moment that I would never forget. The truth doesn't need violence to be devastating. The truth only needs attention. And I was about to give very specific attention to the facts my family had spent years trying to hide. What no one in my family expected was that the daughter they considered the disappointment would become exactly the kind of person they had always feared. Someone who couldn't be controlled, silenced, or redefined to fit their expectations. The girl who studied physical education, the one they whispered was wasting her potential. She was about to teach them all a lesson that would last a lifetime. There are moments in life when you choose between being small and safe, or being big and true. I spent 25 years choosing safety. I chose not to complain when my mother sighed about my career choices. I chose to smile when my father made jokes about those who couldn't get into real medicine. I chose to work 3 jobs while my cousins went to international conferences, while I pretended I didn't know what was happening. But on that Thursday evening, sitting in my apartment with my laptop glowing in the darkness, I made a different choice. I started with the hardest part, my cousin Marcus. Marcus is a plastic surgeon. He's 28 years old, and he'll probably earn more money in 1 year than I will in 5. He was financially supported by our family at every step. Scholarships deemed ineligible for me because they weren't for approved healthcare professions, medical school paid for by that discriminatory trust fund, residency financed, and now a private clinic into which our father had discreetly invested working capital. Marcus is not a bad person. That's the detail people don't understand when you're dealing with family betrayal. He didn't wake up thinking about how to defeat me. He simply enjoyed the fruits of a system that had been built for his specific victory and my systematic defeat. He was comfortable in his ignorance. I called him on a Friday afternoon. He answered on the 3rd ring. Still at his office, I could hear the hum of laser equipment in the background, the sound of success running smoothly. "Isabella?" "What a surprise," he said. and there was that tone of superior friendliness in his voice. "Is everything okay?" "I wanted to see if you had time for coffee," I said, keeping my voice firm, controlled. "I need to talk to you about something important." There was silence on the other end. I could imagine his expression, that slight frown of someone interrupted from something more important. Of course. When? My schedule is packed, but... Tomorrow, 10 a.m. At Thump Coffee, near the hospital. He agreed because he really had no choice. People like Marcus, people who have never been confronted about their privileges, usually agree to meetings because they can't imagine that someone would have the courage to confront them. That night, I placed my phone on a coffee table and went to Thump Coffee with the audio recorder running, hidden inside my shoulder bag. Oregon is a one-party consent state. Only I needed to know I was recording. Legally, it was all above board. The coffee shop smelled like hot espresso and that universal bakery aroma that I had associated with moments of comfort for years. But there was no comfort now. There was only intention. Marcus arrived 5 minutes late, naturally. He was wearing that kind of expensive casual clothing that screams, "I'm successful." A gray cashmere sweater, a gold watch on his wrist, that expensive haircut that costs more in monthly maintenance than my rent. He saw me, and his smile was that smile of someone visiting someone of lower status. "Isabella, you look well," he said, kissing the top of my head in a condescending manner. "How is college going?" That question. That casual question that was everything. It was the diminishment of everything I had accomplished, reduced to the status of student, when I was practically an adjunct professor teaching practical classes while completing my degree. "Actually, I discovered something interesting while researching some documents," I said, without warming up, without preamble. "About the family trust fund." I saw his entire body go rigid. Literally. As if someone had flipped a switch. "Which fund?" he said, but there was something in his voice now. Nervousness. The first truth breaking through the surface of comfort. "The $1 million fund that Grandma left to the family," I said, opening a folder on my phone. I had prepared everything. Screenshots. Documents. Copies of emails. And the very specific clause that our father added in 2019, exactly the year I chose physical education as my career. His face changed. For the first time in my entire life, I saw my cousin Marcus go pale. "Isabella, you don't understand," he began, but I interrupted him. "I understand perfectly. Grandma wrote that the money was to promote the success of her great-grandchildren in healthcare professions. Physical education is a healthcare profession. It's recognized by the NIH, it's classified by the Bureau of Labor Statistics as a healthcare field, it's regulated by professional bodies. But our father added a clause that specifically excludes it. Specifically excludes me." Marcus looked at his coffee, not at me. He was just trying to protect the money. That's a responsibility. Protect the money by sending $50,000 a year to your residency? I asked, my voice calm but each word sharp as glass. While telling me he doesn't have money to help with my tuition? The silence that followed was long. He knew. He had always known. He just never had to think about it because he was too busy being privileged. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice a whisper. "I want you to know that I know. I want you to know that there will be consequences. And I want you to tell our parents that I won't stay silent about this." I left that coffee shop without waiting for his response. I did that on purpose. I left him sitting there, that successful man, with his gold watch and his cashmere sweater, confronted by the reality that his entire life had been built on top of a system of discrimination against me. But Marcus was just the beginning. I spent the following weeks building my case as if it were an academic project, because basically it was. I gathered all the documentation. Every email between my parents about tax strategy. Every bank transfer. Every communication showing that they had deliberately built a clause to specifically exclude me. And then I did something my family never expected. I hired a lawyer. Not to sue. Not yet. It was to get a professional opinion on what I had, and I discovered I had a lot. The lawyer, a woman named Sarah Chan who had studied with my father and was extremely disappointed to learn about his behavior, confirmed that what had happened constituted discrimination within a trust contract. That there were legitimate arguments to contest the clause my father had added. That my grandmother would probably have strongly contested his interpretation of her will. Sarah worked with me on a strategy. It wasn't destruction for destruction's sake. It was structured justice. The first thing was a letter. A formal letter from my lawyer to my parents informing them that we had identified a possible violation of the terms of my grandmother's will, and that they would like to resolve the matter amicably before proceeding with any legal action. The letter also included a timeline, 30 days to respond. 30 days. The time it took for my entire world to turn upside down. I received the call from my mother 3 hours after my lawyer sent the letter. Her tone of voice had changed completely. There was no more that medical calm, that professional security. There was panic. There was anger. There was the voice of a woman who realized her carefully constructed narrative was falling apart. "How dare you?" she said, her voice trembling. "Hire a lawyer. Threaten your own family." "I'm not threatening," I said calmly. "I'm simply pointing out the truth. And truth is a very strong legal defense, Mother. Your father is destroyed. Do you know that? He's literally physically sick over this." And this is where I had to be honest with myself about the psychology of it. Because the truth is that my father was sick. Not with guilt exactly, I didn't have that illusion. But with exposure. With having his carefully constructed sense of moral superiority questioned. He was a man who had spent his entire life seeing himself as the family's protector, as the guardian of values, as someone who made the difficult but right choices. And now he was just a man who had deceived his daughter. "He did this to himself," I said. "I didn't do this. I simply chose not to hide anymore." My mother hung up. But the repercussions kept coming. My uncle, the orthopedic surgeon, called wanting to talk. My aunt, the dermatologist, sent a text saying I was betraying the family legacy. My cousins began making secretive calls to people in the family, trying to manage the damage. And then the part happened that I hadn't completely anticipated. My parents agreed to meet with me. With my lawyer. To resolve this at home, as my mother put it. That meeting took place in a law office in Portland, 90 minutes from Bend. The space was that kind of space that screams professional neutrality. Gray walls, gray carpet, nothing that could offend anyone or leave an emotional mark. My father had aged. Literally. Not weeks since Emma's birthday. It was only 7 weeks. But he looked like he had lost 5 years. His eyes had that glazed quality of someone who hadn't slept well in days. My mother was furious. That was the emotion she had allowed to emerge, because anger was easier than guilt. And I was calm. Impossible to destabilize. "You created a system," I said, looking at both of them, "that specifically excluded me from an inheritance that was legally mine. You lied about it. You told me you didn't have money to help me while you were secretly financing my cousins. You humiliated me publicly for choosing a field you considered inappropriate. And you did all of this while pretending to love me." "We do love you," my father said, his voice weak. "People who love don't create exclusion clauses," I replied. "People who love don't lie. And people who love definitely don't build entire systems to keep someone small and dependent." Sarah, my lawyer, placed a folder on the table. "My client is offering an opportunity to resolve this amicably," she said in her perfect professional tone. "We believe there are legitimate arguments to contest the discriminatory clause added in 2019. Your client's interpretation of the will regarding the term healthcare profession is questionable. However, my client does not wish to destroy her family or engage in extensive litigation. Therefore, we are offering a settlement. You acknowledge the violation, you correct the clause, and you distribute retroactively the funds my client should have received. Approximately $175,000, plus interest." I saw my father go pale. $175,000. 7 years of systematic exclusion. 7 years of working 3 jobs while they pretended they didn't have money. 7 years of being told I needed to learn to manage on my own, while they secretly financed my cousins' lives. There was absolute silence in the office. "And if we don't agree?" my father asked, his voice small. Then we proceed with litigation, Sarah said calmly. This will be public. This will be discovered in depositions. Your colleagues will know. Your institutions will know. And we will explore exactly how much money was distributed to the other beneficiaries and examine the intent behind that additional clause. It will be uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Another pause. You also need to be prepared for the fact that my client has complete documentation of all of this, Sarah continued. And she is considering telling her story publicly if she reaches a settlement. There are many people who face family exclusion, discrimination within family structures. Your story could be important. That last part was mine. I had told Sarah that no matter what happened, I wanted to tell this story. That I wanted people to know that family betrayal didn't come in dramatic and obvious forms. It came through legal clauses, through carefully chosen emails, through protection disguised as exclusion. Before we continue, I need to know, where are you listening to this story from right now? Are you in your cars? In your beds? At work? Maybe hidden behind a desk while pretending to work? Comment below and tell me your location, your country, your context. Because when you share this with me, when you tell me I am here, listening to your words, suddenly I'm not alone in a gray office with my parents and my lawyer anymore. I'm in a room full of people who understand what it's like to be discarded by those who should be standing by your side. I'm home. My parents accepted the settlement on February 17, 2024. Exactly 45 days after my life exploded. The signing of the documents happened quietly, without drama, without some grand final confrontation. Sarah, my lawyer, was at my side when my father signed that paper acknowledging the systematic discrimination he had built against me. His hand trembled. It actually trembled. I observed that tremor the way someone observes an object under a microscope, with clinical interest, without emotional attachment. The money arrived in my bank account 47 days later. $175,000. 7 years of physical education that had been deemed not good enough, finally recognized as valuable in terms of numbers in my account. But here's the truth that no one tells you about justice. Financial justice doesn't heal emotional betrayal. The money arrived, and I felt empty. I had expected to feel victory. Expected to feel validation. What I felt was just the confirmation of something I already knew. My family had chosen the lie about me, and no amount of money could undo that choice. The first thing I did was resign from one of my 3 jobs. That one had been the most degrading. Teaching physical education at a private school where parents constantly questioned me about why I merely taught physical education when I could do something more serious with my life. Those phone calls home, those pitying looks in the hallway, that constant feeling of being in a space where my work was tolerated but never valued. I handed in my resignation with a firm hand. The principal tried to convince me to stay. Offered a raise. Offered an administrative position. But I had learned something in that process of exposure and confrontation. Some people and places had decided who I was, and no amount of effort on my part would change that decision. It was time to leave them behind. With the money, I did 3 very specific things. First, I finished my physical education degree without working. I knew I wanted to specialize in sports physical therapy, a field my family couldn't argue wasn't real medicine. But I needed to do that for me, not as proof of anything. I did it for passion, not for validation. Second, I saved $80,000. I established a fund for myself. The one the doctors in my family had no idea I had. The one that was mine, built with my money, that I had earned with my work. When you come from a family where money is used as control, having money that no one can touch, that no one can deny, that no one can use against you, that's real freedom. Third, I started documenting my story on video. Not as revenge. Not to destroy my family even more. But because I discovered there were literally thousands of people in online communities talking about family exclusion, about being rejected for career choices, about living under the tyranny of expectations they never asked for. And I realized that my story wasn't just mine. It was a reflection of a systematic pattern. Families that establish exclusion clauses through religion, politics, sexuality, career choices. Parents who secretly finance some children while telling others there's no money. Power structures where some people are always enough and others never are. I started making videos. The first ones were just audio, me driving back to Bend after a training session, talking about the process of discovering the truth. It would start with my phone propped on the dashboard, my voice traveling through the wet Oregon streets. I posted the first video to a YouTube channel I created at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday in March. I didn't expect anyone to watch. I expected it to remain invisible, like I had always been. It got 47,000 views in 72 hours. Then 200,000. Then the comments started. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Stories from people who had experienced similar things. My father put my name on a false will because I'm gay. My mom says I pay my own university tuition to build character, but my sister gets everything paid for. I've always been the problem, apparently. I worked in education too, and no one from my family comes to my events. You put into words something I couldn't. I thought it was just me. I thought it was just my family. But this is a systematic thing, isn't it? This is how some families function, with people who matter and people who don't. I read every comment. I spent hours reading them. And I began to see that my story had a purpose beyond my own healing. It was allowing other people to recognize their own patterns of betrayal. It was validating stories that had been silenced. But then the most difficult part came. 6 weeks after I posted the first video, I received a call from my grandmother. Not my mother. My grandmother, my mother's mother, who was 82 years old and whom I rarely saw because she was in a nursing home in Portland. I saw your video, she said, her voice weak but determined. Your grandfather and I watched it. My heart raced. My paternal grandparents. We need to talk to you in person, she continued. The conversation that followed was perhaps the most difficult of the entire journey. Because my grandmother, the one who had left that money, that $1 million that was supposedly to promote success in healthcare professions, had a lot to say about what her son had done with her inheritance. I didn't want this, she said. We were in a visiting room at the nursing home, smelling of disinfectant and that characteristic scent of medical institutions. Ironic, considering everything. Your grandfather and I left that money because we loved all of you. No conditions. No judgments. It was going to go to anyone who wanted to do something meaningful with their lives. Physical education is meaningful. You are meaningful. I started to cry. I couldn't help it. Because that was the validation that part of me was still searching for, from someone who really knew who I was, who had truly left that money. Your father. She hesitated. Your father has his own problems. He always has. He's always been someone who needed to be right, needed to be in control. When you chose physical education, it was like you had challenged not just his authority, but his entire worldview. He didn't know how to deal with a daughter who couldn't be controlled. So he tried. He lied, I said, and my voice was just a whisper. He lied, she agreed. And I'm ashamed of him. Ashamed of my own son. In that moment, something changed in me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, perhaps never. But it was understanding. Understanding that my father was a weak man who had chosen the security of control over the vulnerability of honest support. That my mother had invested so much in maintaining the family image that she had lost the ability to really see her children. That all those patterns of discrimination weren't about me being inadequate. They were about them being unable to handle someone who didn't fit the mold they had prepared. My grandmother gave me something that day. A document. A letter she had written to her lawyer, explicitly requesting that my name be added to any future distribution of her estate. Equally. No conditions. For Isabella, my granddaughter who had the courage to tell the truth. That letter was worth more than the $175,000. Because it said that I was seen. Completely seen, by someone who knew how to really see me. The videos kept going viral. I used the attention very strategically. I started a program called Build Your Own Table. A podcast where I interviewed other people who had been excluded from family inheritances, from family opportunities, from conditional family love. Where I legitimized their stories. Where I showed that this was a pattern, not an isolated incident. With the income that started coming through sponsorships, I began offering scholarships to students of physical education and physical therapy who came from families that had disapproved of them. Small scholarships, maybe $2,000 each. But enough to make a difference. Enough to say, your field matters. You matter. My mother officially cut contact in May. A formal letter from her lawyer saying she and my father wished to be freed from additional family obligations given the public litigation I had initiated. Translation: I had embarrassed them, and now they were punishing me for it. My father tried a different approach. He called twice asking if we could meet. Just you and me, he said. We can work through this. But working through it would have meant I had to pretend it had been accidental. That I would have to embrace some kind of forgiveness I didn't yet feel. That I would have to return to the role of obedient daughter who validated him. I didn't do that. I was kind, because my father wasn't a monster. He was just a small man who had made small choices that deeply impacted my life. But I didn't return to the old patterns of relationship. I set a boundary, until he was genuinely accountable, not just legally but emotionally, for the systematic discrimination he had created. I couldn't have a real relationship with him. He never reached that point. Not yet. Maybe never. Now, here's what I want to leave you with, because this is the really important part. When you discover that you've been betrayed by your family, there's a temptation to turn entirely inward. To believe that something is wrong with you. To take responsibility for your own abandonment. I did that for years. But then I understood. My family didn't reject me because I wasn't good enough. They rejected me because I was too much. Too independent. Too willing to question. Too smart to fall for the control patterns they had established. Too whole. And that's the truth I want to share with every one of you who hears this in a secret place, who reads comments about dysfunctional families knowing it's your own mirror, who works in a field that was labeled inappropriate by people who should have supported you. You are not inadequate. You are dangerous. You are threatening to systems that were built to keep you small. And that's exactly why you matter. Build your own table. This is more than a metaphor. It means that if the table your family offered comes with conditions of diminishment, with expectations of invisibility, with the requirement that you deny parts of yourself, then you don't sit at that table. You leave. And you build your own, surrounded by people who see you completely. My table now consists of my grandmother, who sees my value, Sarah, my lawyer, who believed in me when she had reason to doubt, hundreds of people on my podcast who share their own stories, my students of sports physical therapy, whom I mentor, the 47 students who received scholarships through my program. None of those people are obligated to be there. None of them are there because it's convenient or because it makes them look good. They're there because they genuinely see me. Because they respect the work I do. Because they understand that mattering isn't about having a medical degree. Mattering is about mattering. 14 months after the meeting in the law office, my cousin Marcus sent me a message. He wasn't apologizing. But he said, I saw your show. I saw the stories of other people. I'm understanding things better now. That was all I could expect from him. It wasn't redemption. It was just acknowledgement. My classes are now full. I have a waiting list of people wanting to work with me. I received a research grant to study post-injury rehabilitation methods in athletes. My videos continue to reach people, now at 2 million total views in 6 months. But the most important thing I received wasn't public recognition. It was inner peace. The peace of knowing that I had been honest. That I had chosen integrity over false harmony. That I had chosen my own dignity over the approval of people who could never really see me. My father still hasn't signed the letter of emotional accountability that my lawyer suggested. He probably never will. My mother still hasn't called. She probably never will. And that's okay. Because I learned that some relationships can't be repaired through conversation. They can only be accepted as they really were. Transactions disguised as love, control disguised as protection. So this is what I want you to take from here today. If you're in a family that diminishes you, know that that is their choice, not a reflection of you. If you're in a field that someone told you isn't good enough, know that that judgment says more about the judge than about the work. If you're carrying guilt for rejection, Know that you can place that guilt right back where it belongs. Build your own table. Fill it with people who believe in your value simply because you possess it. Live a life that leaves you at the edge of a public confession because you have nothing to hide. Because life, real life, honest life, is always more vibrant than the prettiest lie your family could ever tell about you. You are not alone in this. You are not wrong. You're just someone who deserved better, and finally, you received it.